Under an obsidian sky, the stars of truth shine brighter than they ever could during the light of day. Join our nighttime journey through the mysteries of the soul and the secrets of the universe. Subscribe today and let the darkness reveal the light you've searched for.
8 years ago, my brother sat across from me at my own kitchen table and told me my 4-year-old nonverbal autistic son would never be anything but a burden on this family. He gave me a deadline: place Silas in a residential care program by the end of the month, or lose the financial support that was the only thing keeping us from going under. I chose my son. Last March, a film studio paid $1.6 million to license a piano composition Silas wrote when he was 12 years old. 6 weeks after that contract was signed, my brother showed up with an attorney and a stack of documents, questioning whether I was fit to manage the trust. I called my own attorney that night. She told me one thing that changed how I walked into that conference room. Let him talk. Let him put every claim into his own words, out loud, where they can be heard, and then wait for my son. Silas was 4 when the diagnosis came home with us from a specialist office on the far side of the city. I was 22, running on no sleep and a kind of determined optimism I've since learned to recognize as the coping mechanism it was. His father and I had already been struggling, 2 people who got serious too young and stayed together because a baby makes leaving feel cruel. When the specialist confirmed what we'd been circling around for 2 years, my ex-husband went quiet on the drive home, and 3 weeks later he told me he needed space. He was gone before the month was out. I don't say that to cast him as a villain. He was 24 and scared and not built for what was coming, but I mention it because it explains the shape of everything that followed. There was no one else. It was me and Silas and a 1-bedroom apartment in Columbus, and the particular kind of tired that doesn't go away with sleep. My brother had always been the capable one in our family, the one who made good money early and didn't let you forget it. He was sympathetic at first, helped with rent for a few months, sent birthday gifts, called on Sundays. But sympathy has an expiration date when the situation doesn't resolve itself. By the time Silas was 4, my brother's sympathy had curdled into something that looked more like a business decision. He came over on a Tuesday night in October. His wife waited in the car. She does that, parks in other people's driveways, and lets him carry the uncomfortable conversations inside. He sat down and laid it out like a budget he'd already run the numbers on. There were residential programs, he said. Good ones. Places with the right staff, the right structure. He had done research. He could make calls. Silas would have everything he needed, and I could. He paused here like he was offering me something. I could have my life back. Meet someone. Have the kind of future I was throwing away by refusing to see the situation clearly. He said the word situation, the way people say it when they mean your son, and don't want to hear themselves out loud. I told him no. He put his hands flat on the table. The support stops at the end of the month, he said. That's not a threat, that's just what's realistic. I said I understood, and I did. I understood that he had decided what my son was worth and come over to inform me of his conclusion. He left without finishing his coffee. I sat at that table for a long time after. Silas had been in the living room, which had gone quiet, and I assumed he'd fallen asleep on the couch where I'd left him. I went to check. He wasn't asleep. He was sitting up, holding his small red iPod Touch, the one he carried everywhere, the one he used to play piano tutorials and tap rhythms on the back of the case, pressing the screen slowly with one finger. I didn't think much of it at the time. The support ended. We moved. I found a smaller apartment 20 minutes from a school district with a better special education program and picked up a second job at a medical records office. I learned the specific arithmetic of a life where you track every dollar and plan around every unexpected expense, like it might be the one that tips everything over. Some weeks it was close. Most of those years it was close. What I didn't know was that, back in our hometown, a story had been quietly taking shape. I wasn't the sister who'd been backed into a corner and made the only choice she could live with. I was the unstable one. The one who had cut off the family without reason, taken a child who needed more than she could give, and hidden him 2 cities away out of pride. My brother had been generous, the story went. I had thrown it back at him. Our Aunt Colette, my father's sister, the kind of woman who still mails birthday cards and means every word inside them, called me once in those early years to check in, and when I explained my side, she went quiet in a way that told me she was hearing it against a version she'd already accepted as fact. I stopped trying to explain after that. I had tried twice, and it felt like standing in front of a painting someone else made of you and arguing with the brushstrokes. So I turned around and went home to my son. Here is what I know about Silas that 8 years of silence meant my brother never learned. He processes everything. Every word said near him, around him, apparently not at him. He files it. He doesn't produce language the way most people do. He types, he points, he uses a communication app, he sometimes writes a single sentence on a notepad that turns out to be the precise center of a conversation you thought had slipped past him 3 hours ago. But he hears. He always has. And his memory has never once failed him in a way I've been able to see. The music started around age 6. A music therapist named Ms. Kendall ran sessions out of a community center 4 blocks from our apartment. I started bringing Silas on Thursday afternoons, mostly because it was a structured hour with a calm adult and we both needed that. Ms. Kendall noticed something in the 3rd session. She pulled me aside afterward and chose her words the careful way people do when they're not sure you're ready to hear something large. Silas wasn't just responding to the music, she told me. He was anticipating it, correcting it. Once, she had played a piece with a deliberate error, a test she used with students, and Silas had stopped her with one finger pointed at the keyboard before she even hit the wrong note. He has perfect pitch, she said, which is rare, but rarer still is what he does with it. Most people with perfect pitch can identify a note. Silas seems to hear the architecture underneath, where a piece wants to go, what it's trying to carry. She asked if she could work with him more specifically on composition. I said yes before she finished the sentence. Over the next 2 years, something opened up that I'd only seen the edges of before. He had always been communicating. I'd learned that much. The objects he placed in my lap to describe his afternoon, the colors he pointed to. The way he arranged things by some internal logic I had to learn to read like a second language. But music gave him a channel wide enough to hold everything he was carrying. I watched him one afternoon at the second-hand keyboard we'd found at a thrift shop, building something from nothing, his whole body going still, the way it does when he's listening to something inside himself. Miss Kendall stood in the doorway. I stood beside her. Neither of us said anything. We just watched him for a while. He kept recordings of every piece on his iPod. He stacked versions on top of each other, returned to them, changed single notes, and when a piece was finished, he never touched it again. Finished meant something specific to him that no one else could define or argue with. One piece he worked on longer than all the others. He started it when he was 12, finished it at 13. Unlike the rest, he didn't name it when I asked. Just looked past my shoulder in the way he does when he's choosing words carefully, and eventually typed 2 letters on his communication app, returned. Ms. Kendall heard it and went still the same way I had. She asked him gently what the title meant. He looked at the keyboard and didn't answer. She entered it in a statewide young composers competition without telling him until after. It placed first. A recording found its way to a music supervisor for a film studio through a connection Miss Kendall had spent years tending carefully. The supervisor called her on a Tuesday, 2 days after listening, on a Monday morning. By the following spring, with Silas 15 and an attorney named Ms. Farrar reviewing every document on his behalf. A licensing agreement was signed. The number at the bottom of the final page was $1,600,000. Because he was a minor, the money went immediately into a trust in his name. Ms. Farrar gave me one instruction and repeated it until it was carved into me. The money is his. Your job is to guard it. Keep the records clean. Don't touch it. I kept every statement, every document. I kept them in a folder with nothing in it but his name. The regional press ran a small piece about the deal. It used Silas's name. He had approved that in his deliberate way after we talked it through. The only photo was the back of his head, which we had insisted on. The piece described the composition as a meditation on displacement and longing. It had no idea. My brother read that article. I know because he called 3 days later. First time I'd heard his voice in 8 years. His tone was warm, in a way I hadn't heard since, before the sympathy curdled. He said he'd been thinking about us, that family matters, that he hoped we could move forward. I noticed he said we before he ever said Silas's name. The letter from his attorney came 11 days later. Heavy paper, firm name pressed into the corner. It requested recognition of his early financial support, which had lasted 4 months, as grounds for partial interest in earnings produced during that period. A second paragraph, softer on the surface and worse underneath, raised concerns about whether the current custodial arrangement truly served the minor's interests, given what it called the mother's history of instability. It requested a neutral third party be appointed to co-manage the trust. I read the phrase "the mother's history" and underlined it, not out of anger, because it told me exactly what I was working with. He hadn't guessed at my history. He had spent 8 years building it. Miss Farrar read the letter twice and took off her glasses. We could respond aggressively, she said, or we could let them walk into the room and put every claim on the record in front of witnesses. People who are lying tend to do poorly when they're asked to say the lie out loud where it can be examined, and people telling the truth tend to look exactly like that. She said the calmer I was, the cleaner the contrast would be. I went home and thought about it for 2 days. The night before I called her back, Silas came and stood in the kitchen doorway while I sat with the letter on the table. He had his iPod in one hand. He looked at the envelope and then at me. That's from him, he said. Flat, no inflection, not a question. I said yes. He looked at the letter a moment longer. Then, he called me returned. In the kitchen that night. I was on the couch. I heard him. 8 years. For 8 years I had believed Silas was asleep. For 8 years he had been carrying what he heard through the open doorway while my brother sat across from me and described my son as something that gets sent back from every situation that requires it to be acceptable. I stood in the kitchen after he left the room, very still, for a long time. When I asked him later whether the iPod had been recording that night, he didn't answer right away. He went to his room and came back with the device in its red scratch-proof case and set it on the table in front of me. He had 214 voice memos, organized by date. The third file from the oldest was from that October, 8 years ago. The file name was the same 2 words as the composition, returned. I did not press play. I handed it back to him. There are things you let a person carry in their own time, into their own room, on their own terms. This was his. The meeting was a Wednesday morning. My brother arrived with his attorney and his wife, who sat 2 chairs away and said almost nothing and agreed with everything. Colette was there as the family witness. My brother had personally asked her to attend because he was certain of her. 8 years of holidays had made her certain of him, too. That was his first mistake of the morning. Silas sat beside me. The iPod was in his jacket pocket. His hands were flat on the table. Miss Farrar invited my brother to begin. He talked for 30 minutes. His attorney helped. They built the version of the past 8 years he had been refining since the month we moved to Columbus. He had been supportive. He had offered resources. I had been volatile, difficult, too proud to do what any reasonable person could see was necessary. The money, his attorney said, wasn't really the issue. The real issue was whether a woman with my history of emotionally driven decisions was the right person to steward a teenager's assets, especially when stable family members were willing and available. He said all of this while looking at a spot on the table between us. Not at Silas. In the entire meeting, I don't believe my brother looked directly at Silas once. He had driven 2 hours to decide the future of a boy he could not bring himself to see sitting 8 feet away. I had planned to say nothing. I held to that plan. Silas waited until the attorney finished, waited a few more seconds after that. Then he set the iPod on the table and pressed play. The first sounds were our old apartment. The radiator, a car passing outside, the low hum of an old refrigerator, and then my brother's voice, clear, unhurried. Every program you try, every school, every attempt at anything normal. He gets returned, Audrey. That's the reality you keep refusing to accept. You can love him all you want. It won't change what he is. The room went the particular still of a space where everyone has stopped breathing at once. 11 seconds of silence on the recording, and then 4 notes, soft, low, not fully formed yet, a child humming the beginning of something that had no name yet. Silas stopped the recording. "That's the first 4 notes," he said. His voice was quiet and level. "I wrote the rest that night, after he left." He had brought a printout of the studio's press release. He set it on the table so Colette could reach it. The title, the description, the sale price. "The piece, your attorney is calling a windfall," Silas said, still not looking at my brother. "I started it 11 seconds after he stopped talking. I was in the next room. I heard everything. The first notes are on that recording." My brother started to say something about context. His attorney put a hand on his arm. Silas looked at Colette for the first time since the meeting began. "He called me Returned," Silas said. "Then he left. Then I wrote a piece called Returned. Then a studio bought it for $1.6 million. Now he wants part of it." A pause. "That is the whole story." Colette picked up the press release. "Read it slowly. Set it back down the way you set down something that has burned your fingers." She looked at my brother. "You told me she cut off all contact," Colette said. Her voice was not raised. "You said she took that boy away and refused to let any of us near him." My brother said nothing. "We drove 2 hours," she said, "and that child was in the room the entire time." My brother's attorney made one last attempt to redirect. "The recording didn't address the underlying custodial question," he said. "The matter of ongoing fitness was still—" Miss Farrar let him finish. "Then, the custodian has clean records, documented trust management, and a court-approved sale. The minor in this room has just demonstrated, in front of witnesses, both the capacity for sustained independent judgment and the foresight to preserve 8 years of documentation. If there are further questions about custodial fitness, we are prepared to address them. But I believe we are finished with the claim itself." My brother looked at his own hands on the table. His wife looked at the window. Colette looked at nothing in particular. They left during the recess. The attorney for my brother sent a brief letter 9 days later. Plain paper this time, no raised letterhead. His clients were withdrawing all claims and would not be pursuing the matter further. The co-management petition was never filed. The trust stayed exactly as it was, with Silas's name at the top and my clean records beside it. Colette called me the weekend after. She had gone home and thought and made other calls, and been quiet, in the way people are quiet when they're sorting through 8 years of something they repeated, because it was easier than questioning the source. She said she was sorry. I didn't tell her. It was okay. We both knew it wasn't. I told her I was glad she'd come. That felt true, and it was all I had to give her. What spread through the family after that I heard mostly secondhand. The version Colette was carrying now was not the one my brother had left sitting on the table for years. People were doing the math slowly, the way people do when they've accepted a story because it required nothing of them. Some of them reached out. Some went quiet in a new way. The way you go quiet when you've been caught believing something convenient. I didn't chase any of them. I had spent 8 years producing evidence of my own worthiness for people who required the proof before they'd treat me decently, and I was finished with that work. My brother sent a text weeks later, short, no apology in it, just a statement that he had made decisions based on what he believed was right at the time. I read it once and put my phone down. Silas started a new composition the following month. I don't know yet what it's called. He works the way he works. In silence, in layers, building something until it tells him it's finished. And I've learned not to interrupt that process. But there was one more thing that happened in that conference room. After the recording played, and the press release was on the table, and before the recess that ended everything, in that stillness while the room was still catching up, Silas reached into his jacket pocket a second time. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and slid it across the table, not toward his uncle, toward me. It was a composition score, handwritten notation at the top. The title was not returned. The title was my name. I wrote this 3 years ago, he said. I wasn't ready to play it for you yet. He looked at me the way he does when he wants something understood clearly and exactly. You didn't leave. Most people do. You didn't. The piece the world heard, the one that sold, the one critics called a meditation on displacement, was written from loss, from hearing himself described as something that gets sent back. What no one outside that room knew was that there had always been a second piece. The one he'd been holding 3 years. The one with my name at the top. I still haven't heard it. He told me he'd play it when the time was right, and with Silas, right means right, and I have learned by now not to rush his schedule. The score sits on my kitchen counter. Sometimes I look at it and think about a 4-year-old who couldn't say what he needed in words and all the ways he turned out to be holding on anyway, filing things away, turning the weight of what he carried into something that outlasted every person who had tried to decide what he was. Family isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes it's the one person who stays in the room, who learns your language, who guards the thing that's yours when everyone around them is deciding it belongs to them instead. Silas understood that long before I did. He put it in a title. He just wasn't ready yet to let me hear it.